Okay, folks, buckle up, because tonight we're opening on one of the most uncomfortable chapters in modern history, a secret operation, Nazi scientists, falsified records. The men who built Hitler's war machine, becoming the architects of America's future. And the strangest part? Almost everything you're about to hear is documented. Get ready for a wild ride. May 1945. The war in Europe is over. The rubble is still warm, and while the world celebrates peace, something else is happening in the shadows. American intelligence officers are not hunting Nazis to put them on trial. They're hunting them to hire them. Over 1,600 scientists, engineers, technicians, men who design weapons for Hitler are about to be given new names, new homes, and a one-way ticket to the United States. You've never heard the full story, but you've felt its consequences. Right, so that's the setup, and I want you all to sit with that number for a second. 1,600. That's not a handful of rogue agents sneaking someone out. That's a logistical operation on an industrial scale. Truman signed off on this. The State Department signed off on this. And what I find genuinely strange is that the narrative we all got taught, America won the space race, America beat the Soviets, kind of skips over the part where the rocket that put Armstrong on the moon was designed by a man who built V2s for Hitler. That's not a footnote, that is the foundation. The fall of the Reich and the scramble for mines. By spring 1945, Nazi Germany is collapsing from the inside. Allied forces are pushing in from every direction. But amid the chaos, American military intelligence isn't just collecting weapons, they are collecting mines. The Joint Chiefs of Staff established something called the T-Force, over 2,000 personnel, whose job is to sweep through 5,000 German targets. They're looking for synthetic rubber, jet engines, rocket technology, and something they call scientific and industrial personalities. Now that phrase matters. They're not just grabbing documents, they are cataloguing people. And here's where it gets interesting. The US isn't the only one doing this. The Soviet Union is running the exact same playbook, and there's a clock ticking. The Allied zones are about to be carved up. Saxony and Thuringia, where many of Germany's research facilities sit, will become Soviet territory on July the 1st, 1945. So, there is a scramble, a quiet, desperate scramble to grab as many brains as possible before the door slams shut. The scientists themselves know what's coming, and most of them have a choice, and most choose the Americans. One engineer later put it plainly: "We despise the French. We are mortally afraid of the Soviets. We don't believe the British can afford us, so that leaves the Americans." And think about that. The scientists who built Hitler's war machine didn't just surrender. They chose their captors, they negotiated, and the Americans were more than happy to make a deal. What I find wild about this is the framing. We talk about the end of World War II as this clean break. Good guys won, bad guys lost. Nuremberg trials, justice served. But on the ground in real time, the US military was running a recruitment drive. The T-Force isn't some fringe theory, it's documented in the National Archives, 5,000 targets. And that phrase, scientific and industrial personalities, that's a human shopping list. The war didn't end, it just changed employers. Now these guys went from designing weapons for the Third Reich to designing weapons for the Pentagon, and nobody apparently saw the problem with that. The Osenberg List, a roll call found in a toilet. To understand how the Americans knew who to grab, you need to know about a document called the Osenberg List. By 1943, Germany is losing. Resources are drained. The military needs scientists back from the front lines. So, a man named Wernher Osenberg, heading the Nazi Defense Research Association, compiles a list. Every politically cleared scientist, engineer and technician in the Reich. It's essentially a directory of Germany's best minds, sorted by the Nazis for usefulness and political loyalty. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In March 1945, a Polish lab technician at Bonn University finds pieces of this list stuffed into a toilet. Now, someone was trying to destroy it. The fragments make their way to British intelligence, MI6, who pass them along to the Americans. And the Americans now have a blueprint, a shopping list already sorted by the Nazis themselves of every scientist worth taking. Major Robert B. Staver, chief of the Jet Propulsion Section of the US Army Ordnance Corps, takes that list and starts crossing names. At the top, Wernher von Braun, Germany's best rocket scientist, the man who built the V2. The V2 was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, launched from Peenemünde on the Baltic coast. It killed thousands, and the man who designed it is about to become one of the most celebrated figures in American science. But here's the thing. The Americans don't just take von Braun, they take the whole list, everyone the Nazis considered useful. And they don't ask too many questions about what these men did during the war. A list found in a toilet. You couldn't write that into a novel without someone saying that's too on the nose. But it happened, and what strikes me is the efficiency of it all. The Nazis basically did all the hard work of cataloguing their own scientists, and then handed the Americans the receipt. MI6 passed it along like a friendly tip. There's something darkly funny about intelligence agencies sharing a spreadsheet of war criminals like it's a LinkedIn recommendation. Hey, you might want to check this guy out. Top of his class, built a rocket that killed thousands. Great team player. It's absurd, but it's real. Sometimes reality doesn't need embellishment, it just needs you to actually look at it. Von Braun's deal, the man who sold the stars. Let's talk about Wernher von Braun, because his story is Operation Paperclip in miniature. Von Braun was a member of the Nazi Party. He was an SS officer. He developed the V2 rocket at Peenemünde. And the V2 was built using slave labour from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp, where an estimated 20,000 prisoners died. And let me be clear, von Braun knew. He visited Mittelwerk, he saw the conditions, he held meetings inside the tunnel complex where people were dying above him. This isn't speculation, it's documented. Now, here's where the deal happens. In 1945, von Braun and over 1,000 of his colleagues make a decision. They surrender to the Americans. They bring with them 14 tons of V2 blueprints, parts and technical documents, hidden in an abandoned mine shaft. The Americans don't just accept the surrender, they celebrate it. Now, von Braun is brought to the US, given a security clearance and installed at Fort Bliss, Texas. He's treated as a guest, not a prisoner. And within a decade, he's on the cover of Time magazine. He's doing Disney specials about space exploration. He's the public face of the American rocketry. And the man who built Hitler's vengeance weapon is now building America's dream machine. And in 1960, when his team transferred to NASA, they formed the core of the Marshall Space Flight Center. They developed the Saturn V, the rocket that puts Neil Armstrong on the moon. But nobody talks about the 14 tons of documents. Nobody talks about Mittelbau-Dora. Nobody talks about what von Braun was building before he was building rockets for freedom. Okay, so here's my honest take. Von Braun was clearly a genius. The Saturn V is one of the most extraordinary machines ever built. But here's the thing that happens with genius. We want it to be clean. We want the guy who put us on the moon to be a hero, full stop. And he might have been brilliant, but he was also an SS officer who built weapons with slave labour. Both of those things are true at the same time. And you know what it reminds me of? It's like finding out your favourite restaurant is owned by someone who did something terrible. The food is still good, but you can't unknow what you know. Now, the Saturn V still flew, but the hands that designed it have a history, and we just decided that history didn't matter. And that's a choice, a deliberate one. The paperclip folders, falsified files, and scrubbed pasts. Here's where the story goes from uncomfortable to genuinely sinister. President Harry Truman officially authorized Operation Paperclip on September 3rd, 1946. His order was explicit: no Nazi Party members, no active supporters of Nazism, no one suspected of war crimes. Clear enough. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, the JIOA, was tasked with implementing that order. And here's what they did instead. They falsified scientist files, they scrubbed Nazi Party memberships, they removed SS affiliations. They rewrote employment histories. In some cases, they invented entirely new backgrounds. The National Archives now hold the original documents and the scrubbed versions. You can compare them side by side. The before and after of a man who was an SS officer on Tuesday and a political refugee on Wednesday. This wasn't a few bad apples, this was systemic. The JIOA representatives included the Army's Director of Intelligence, the Chief of Naval Intelligence, the Assistant Chief of Air Staff Intelligence, and a representative from the State Department. Every branch of American intelligence was on it. One name worth knowing, Kurt Debus, former V2 rocket scientist, former SS officer. In 1962, he became NASA director. You're looking at a picture of him right now, sitting between President John F. Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon Johnson at a Cape Canaveral briefing. An SS officer sitting between the President and the Vice President of the United States. Wow. Just wow. Well, this is the part that genuinely bothers me, because it's not a question of did they know. They knew. Truman knew. The State Department knew. The FBI knew. And they didn't just look the other way. They actively fabricated government documents to circumvent a presidential order. Now, if you or I falsified a federal employment record, that's a felony. When the JIOA did it 1,600 times, it was called national security. I'm not saying there's some shadow government running everything, but I am saying that when every intelligence agency in the country agrees to break the rules in the same direction, that's not a coincidence. That is a policy. And policies have consequences that outlast the people who made them. The question isn't whether they broke the rules. The question is why we're still not talking about it. The 20,000, Mittelbau-Dora, and the price of the moon. Let's go back to the V2, because the V2 is where the romance of Operation Paperclip meets reality. And the V2 rocket was manufactured at a place called Mittelwerk, an underground facility complex tunneled into the Hertz Mountains. The labour came from Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. Prisoners, political dissidents, Jewish people, POWs, were worked to death building the V2 rockets in conditions that defy description. The death toll is estimated at 20,000. 20,000 people died building rockets that were then used to bomb London and Antwerp. And here's the name you need to know: Arthur Rudolph. He was the operations director of Mittelwerk. He was there. He managed the factory where those 20,000 people died. Arthur Rudolph was brought to the United States through Operation Paperclip. He worked for NASA. He helped develop the Saturn V. He was celebrated as a key figure in the Apollo program. And in 1984, nearly 40 years after the war, he was investigated by the Office of Special Investigations. The investigation found that he had been involved in the use of slave labour at Mittelwerk. Rather than face trial, Rudolph renounced his American citizenship and left the United States. He went back to Germany. He was never tried. He was never convicted. He died a free man in 1996. 20,000 people died in those tunnels. The man who managed the factory helped put Americans on the moon. And when the truth finally caught up with him, he simply left. I think Arthur Rudolph's story is the one that should keep you up at night, because this isn't about ideology, this is about arithmetic. 20,000 people died in those tunnels. And the guy who ran the factory got to live the American dream for 4 decades. NASA named things after these men. There's a building at Marshall Space Flight Center that had von Braun's name on it for years. There was a Hubertus Strughold award for space medicine until people started asking questions. It's like naming a hospital after someone who ran the ward where everyone died. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. We put these men on stamps and in textbooks, and the people who actually built the rockets, the ones who died in the tunnels, don't even have graves. We know their number, but you don't know their names. The father of space medicine, Strughold's shadow. Hubertus Strughold was called the father of space medicine. He pioneered research on weightlessness, life support systems, and human performance in extreme conditions. His work was foundational in the American space program. He was also implicated in human experiments at the Dachau concentration camp. The allegations against Strughold are specific. During the war, he was director of the Luftwaffe's Institute for Aviation Medicine. Research conducted at Dachau under the auspices of this institute included experiments on prisoners, high-altitude decompression experiments, freezing experiments, experiments that tortured people to death in the name of science. Strughold was never charged. The reasons are complicated, partly a lack of surviving documentation directly linking him to specific experiments, partly the convenient loss of records that the Americans might have preferred to lose. And here's the thing that should make you uncomfortable. In 1948, Strughold was working for the US Air Force. He was putting rhesus monkeys into decompression chambers. He was studying the effects of high altitude on living organisms. The same kind of research, the same methodology that was allegedly conducted on human beings at Dachau. And the Space Medicine Association named an award after him. It stood for decades. It was only in 2012 that the association quietly removed his name, after a public campaign highlighted the Dachau connection. So, the next time you hear about the heroism of the Apollo program, remember that the man who defined how astronauts would survive in space may have first learned those lessons on prisoners in a concentration camp. Well, this is the one where I genuinely lose the plot a little bit, because Strughold case is different from von Braun. Von Braun built rockets, terrible, yes, but rockets. Strughold's field was human experimentation. The difference between I built a weapon and I experimented on people to see how they die is not a small difference. It's a difference between a weapons manufacturer and someone who operated on people without their consent. And the fact that the Space Medicine Association kept his name on an award until 2012 tells you how deeply embedded this mythology is. We didn't just accept these men, we honoured them. We gave them awards with their names on them. It took over 60 years for anyone to say, maybe we shouldn't. 60 years. That's not an oversight. That's a commitment to not looking. the other paperclip, Operation Osoaviakhim, and the Shadow Space Race. Now, here's the part of the story most people miss, because Operation Paperclip wasn't just an American operation, it was a global scramble. On October 22, 1946, the Soviet Union launched Operation Osoaviakhim. In a single night, Soviet forces rounded up more than 2,200 German scientists and their families, over 6,000 people, and transported them east, loaded onto trains, taken to research facilities across the USSR. No warning, no negotiation, no choice. The Americans had offered their scientists a deal. The Soviets simply took theirs, but the result was the same. German scientists on both sides, building the weapons and rockets that would define the Cold War. Think about what that means. The space race, the great symbolic contest between democracy and communism, freedom and tyranny, was in a large part a competition between two groups of former Nazi scientists trying to outbuild each other. The Soviet rocket program was led in part by Helmut Gotthard, a former assistant to von Braun. The American program was led by von Braun himself, two men who had worked together at Peenemünde, now on opposite sides of an ideological war, building the same technology for different masters. The Cold War wasn't just fought with German scientists, it was started by them. The missiles pointing at Moscow were designed by the same hands that built the V2. The missiles pointing at Washington were designed by their colleagues. Operation Paperclip wasn't just about science, it was about control, about who would own the future and who would be erased to make it happen. Well, the thing that gets me about Osoaviakhim is the symmetry. We're told the Cold War was democracy versus communism. But if you strip away the flags and the ideology, what you actually have is two superpowers, each grabbing a set of German scientists and saying, build me the biggest rocket. It's like two kids finding a toolbox and fighting over who gets the best hammer. The ideology was just the packaging. Now, underneath it, both sides were doing the exact same thing, using the same people, the same research, the same dark origins to build weapons that could end the world. The Cold War wasn't a battle of ideas. It was a contest between two arms dealers who happened to share the same supplier. And the supplier never switched sides, it just sold to both. The legacy we inherited. So let's bring this together, because by now you should be seeing the shape of something. Over 1,600 scientists brought to America. Their past scrubbed, their files falsified, their war records buried. They built the rockets that won the space race. They founded the field of space medicine. They developed missile systems that defined American military power for decades. The economic value was estimated at $10 billion in patents and industrial processes, and that's in 1940s money. But here's the question that's been sitting underneath the entire story, the one we never quite ask out loud. What did they bring with them? And not the documents, not the rocket blueprints. What did they bring in terms of mindset, of philosophy, of willingness to see human beings as expendable resources in service of a larger goal? Because when you take men who built weapons using slave labor, and you put them in charge of your most celebrated national achievement, you're not just importing their expertise, you're importing their values, their priorities, their sense of what's acceptable in the pursuit of progress. Operation Paperclip was justified as a necessary evil, a moral compromise to win the Cold War. But necessary evils have a habit of becoming foundations, and foundations have a habit of defining everything built on top of them. The next time you watch footage of the Apollo 11 landing, that grainy black and white moment of triumph, remember that the rocket that got them there was designed by men who learned their craft building weapons for Hitler, using labor from concentration camps. America didn't just hire Nazi scientists, it made them American, and then it forgot. Here's where I land on all of this. I'm not suggesting there's some secret conspiracy where the Fourth Reich quietly took over NASA. That's not what the evidence shows. What the evidence shows is something more mundane and, honestly, more disturbing. A government made a calculated decision that expertise was more valuable than accountability, that winning mattered more than justice. And once you make that decision once you decide that certain people are too useful to prosecute, you've set a precedent. And that precedent doesn't just apply to 1945, it applies every time someone in power decides the ends justify the means. Operation Paperclip isn't just history, it's a mirror. And the question it asks isn't what did they do, it's what would we do? Same situation, same choice, same justification. What would we do? Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. And thank you to everyone who's subscribed over the last few weeks. We've now hit our first major milestone of over 100,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much. And why not check out my other channel, Chronicles of the Drift, link in the description below. And I've got Patreon and YouTube memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Okay, my friends, be safe, and until next time, stay curious.